Hello, busy dads and busy people everywhere. Today's video is another installment in the Busy Dad Nutrition series. And in today's video, I want to revisit the topic of caffeine. Because my daily caffeine protocol, and it really is a protocol, it's something I stick to religiously, has changed quite significantly recently. And I wanted to share with all of you where I'm at now and what my advice is as of today. Before I describe the change, I want to tell you all that this change that I've made, I'm only about 4 weeks in, but I want to say it feels like it's setting up to be one of the single most significant daily routine changes I've made in the last 5 years since I quit drinking. It really feels like it's been a complete game changer, and I'm very, very excited to share it with you. This is a video I've been very excited about making. And to begin, I want to tell you the story that got me to the point that I'm at now. So for about a 2-week period earlier this year, I was sleeping extremely badly. Everyone who's a dad knows what uninterrupted sleep feels like when their child is waking up throughout the night, but when your kid is a toddler or a bit older, typically they'll get through the night. And indeed, in this case, what was keeping me up was not my daughter at all, it was me. Every night, night after night, the following would happen. I'd fall asleep, things felt fine, but then at about 2 a.m. I'd wake up, go for a pee, and I'd be lying in my bed till 5, 6 a.m. before I could get back to sleep. This was impacting everything, because a bad night or two is fine, but 15 or 16 of these things stacked together, I was walking around like a zombie, feeling something close to despair. I was feeling really, really bad. And on night 16, as I lay in bed at 4:30 in the morning, contemplating my options, I contemplated a radical solution, or at least a radical course of action, which was to quit caffeine altogether. Now that was radical for me. Since I quit drinking, I've never taken a day off caffeine. I've depended on it psychologically. And so that'll give you a sense of how desperate I was that I was even considering that. And so the next day, I didn't drink coffee, and for a whole week, I went completely cold turkey without caffeine. By the way, my friends, if any of you are planning on doing that, I also took a daily dose of phenylalanine, a non-protein amino acid that really helped. In any case, what I found over the course of that week was that I slept like a baby. I woke up at night at 2 a.m, but by 2:05 I was back to sleep. And I felt so much better. And that was a real eye-opener, because for the longest time I had thought that the only real effect of caffeine on your sleep is on falling asleep. If you're able to fall asleep, then you've gotten away with it. What I didn't realize is that caffeine has much more complicated effects on the quality and the architecture of your sleep. And so really, it seems to me very clear that caffeine was what was making the difference. Caffeine was the thing that was keeping me up between 2 and 5 o'clock in the morning. And so that when I pulled it, I slept like a baby. And my mood changed, massively improved, much more even. My energy levels were pretty good. But I did miss caffeine for sure, especially in my work. I felt that my attention was scattered and dispersed, but at the same time I couldn't argue with those quality nights of sleep. And so I started doing some research. Is there a way of incorporating caffeine, leveraging its power for my daily routine, but still having sleep of this kind of quality? Because the sleep was the best sleep I'd had in years. And good sleep is better than anything else, especially for training, but for mood, for all kinds of things. So I asked myself, is there a way of having my cake and eat it, keeping caffeine in my life, but also ensuring, protecting my sleep quality? And I'm really pleased to say that I think I've struck on a protocol that does both of those things. So you'll know from my previous video on caffeine that I am not an advocate of drinking caffeine within the first 90 to 120 minutes of waking. That's something that Andrew Huberman has since really popularized that idea. It doesn't make sense to do that because caffeine is an adenosine antagonist. What that means is that it binds to the receptors where adenosine functions, where it binds, and so that it stops the adenosine, which is the sleep hormone, from doing its job and eventually from dispersing. And so when you wake up in the morning, although your adenosine levels are fairly low, they're not yet completely at zero. And so if you have caffeine, what you're doing is at that time, you are setting yourself up for a dip later on, because as long as the caffeine is in your system, that adenosine cannot disperse. And so when the caffeine leaves your system, you've got all of this secondhand saved up adenosine, sleep hormone, that's going to hit you pretty hard, and so you're going to get that crash. And so for the sake of your energy later on in the day, you don't want to drink caffeine within the first 2 hours of waking, because within 2 hours of waking, you've completely dispelled the adenosine. So that's the time that you should think about having caffeine. So I already had that restriction, no caffeine within the first 2 hours of waking. But what I also discovered is that for most of us, caffeine has a quarter life of 12 hours. That means that there are 12 hours after consuming caffeine, a quarter of that amount of caffeine is still bioactive in your system, having its effects. And so that means you really, 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 if you care about sleep quality, do not want to have caffeine less than 12 hours before sleeping. It's the equivalent. Having a cup of coffee, because for me I drink a pretty strong cup of coffee, say having a 200 milligram of caffeine worth of coffee at, say, 11 o'clock in the morning is the equivalent to having a 50 milligram caffeine espresso shot at 11 o'clock at night just before going to bed. You don't want to do that. And so, those two findings together, no coffee within 12 hours of waking, no coffee within 12 hours of going to sleep, created a very small window for me to consume caffeine. For me, I wake up at these days around 7. I go to bed around 10:30, 11. So really, 9 to 10 is my window. So find your caffeine hour. Most of us will have an hour that is more than 2 hours after waking, but also more than 12 hours before sleeping. That's the window for consumption. And what I discovered through my research is that it's safe to consume about 1 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So for me, I'm landing at about 200 milligrams in my portion of caffeine, and I'm just having one. Not only that, I'm only having caffeine on work days, which means at the weekend, at a minimum on a Sunday, but sometimes on a Saturday too, I have no caffeine. And what I've found is that I've got all of the benefits of that week I had away from caffeine. My mood is higher, my energy is more even throughout the day, and I'm sleeping really well. But I'm also having all of the benefits that I had in my old caffeinated life for my focus, but actually I'm having way more benefit, because what happens as you start to drink less caffeine, and especially if you have a week of cold turkey, is that your caffeine sensitivity increases, so that the caffeine is way more powerful and potent. My friends, that first coffee I had after my 7 days of cold turkey felt like a Class A drug. And even now, every day, it's incredibly effective, that cup of coffee. It's a small cup, but it's unbelievably effective. It helps with my training sessions. Some mornings I have it before I train. But I'm also not committed to taking caffeine before training. Some mornings I just have it as a work aid. But it's unbelievably effective. And because I am taking the weekends to reset, I'm going in each week having kind of renewed my caffeine tolerance, taking it back down, so that every week, all 5 of those coffees from Monday to Friday hit hard. They're really effective, but by the time it's bedtime, the caffeine is sufficiently depleted in my system that I'm finding that my sleep is pretty much as good. Not quite as good. It's better at the weekend when I don't drink caffeine at all, but it's still much, much better on a Monday to Friday basis as well. I feel so much better. So much better. And so if any of you are abusing caffeine, if any of you are really hooked on caffeine, overusing it, as I was for years and years and years, I strongly recommend trying out what I'm recommending. Take a cold turkey period if you can face it. Find a completely caffeine-free decaf coffee. Get some phenylalanine. And after a week, find that caffeine hour. More than 2 hours after waking. More than 12 hours before sleeping. Consume 1 to 3 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. And have 1 dose of caffeine in the day, just 1. If you can, reset at weekends. It is an absolute game changer. So I wanted to share that experience with all of you. I hope that some of you at least give this a try. It's really, really been unbelievably beneficial for me. All right, my friends, we'll speak again soon.